Antarctica is the last frontier. It holds our imagination. The last remaining territory on the planet that could have such a designation is Antarctica.
In the late 1700s, when the world was still a map of mysteries and untold stories, William Morris, a former Navy navigator, set sail toward a place so treacherous and unexplored that no sailor had ever returned from it. The destination, the icy walls of Antarctica. But what William discovered there was not just the uncharted territory he sought, it was a hidden truth, locked away for centuries, that would forever alter humanity's understanding of its past. The extraordinary events that unfolded on this journey would reveal ancient civilizations, long-forgotten powers, and the dangerous game of forces controlling the course of human history. What really lies beyond the ice, and how far are we willing to go to uncover the secrets kept from us for so long? The Captain's Tale. It was the year 1779 when William Morris, a former Navy navigator turned adventurer, first heard the whispers that would alter the course of his life. During a long, silent night in the aftermath of the Battle of Saratoga, his ship, bound for Charleston, drifted over the dark, calm waters of the Atlantic. The crew, anxious and battle-weary, passed the time by swapping stories over whiskey. It was then that Captain Butler, a man with a reputation for navigating dangerous waters, spoke of an impossible tale, a tale that had haunted his thoughts since the days of Captain James Cook's obsession with the Antarctic Circle. Butler described a secret passage within the icy realm, a gateway to lands untouched by man. His voice, steady yet filled with a hidden conviction, left William unsettled. Could it be true? A journey through the Antarctic ice could lead to a world no sailor had ever returned from, yet the thought of such a place ignited something within William, a deep, unshakable curiosity. Years passed, and with the war behind him, William could no longer ignore the call of the unknown. Despite the laughter of his friends and the hesitation in his wife Lucy's voice, he acquired a ship and gathered a small crew. The idea of crossing the Antarctic ice was once again burning in his soul. But when William finally approached Captain Butler with the request to join him on this extraordinary journey, the seasoned navigator hesitated. Weeks later, Butler appeared at William's door, unannounced and bearing a set of ancient maps, accompanied by a man named Fint. They both seemed like ghosts from another era, carrying with them secrets that William could not yet comprehend. It was then that Butler revealed the truth. They were not the only ones interested in what lay beyond the ice. A powerful and ancient group, known as the Custodians, had been watching them, and they weren't pleased with their plans. Despite Butler's warning, William was determined to proceed. He saw this as his only chance to uncover the mysteries of the world, to break free from the boundaries that had always been set by men of power. But the strange encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth. Fint, the enigmatic man who had accompanied Butler, seemed to carry a deeper understanding of what lay ahead, a knowledge that both unsettled and intrigued William. What were these Custodians? And why were they so protective of the secrets hidden in the Antarctic? These questions haunted William as the days passed, and the preparations for the voyage grew more intense. The sense of danger was palpable, but so was the promise of discovery. The crew was growing anxious, and even Lucy, though she had urged him to stay, could not hide the fear in her eyes. On November 14th, William and his crew set sail, the Atlantic Ocean now a distant memory. They ventured toward the south, toward the vast, frozen wilderness that had remained untouched by civilization. The weather was cold and unforgiving, and the tension on board grew with each passing day. Captain Butler, who had always been calm in the face of adversity, became increasingly quiet, as if weighed down by the enormity of the journey. Fint, too, became more distant, his eyes often lost in thought, as though he were listening to voices from another world. William began to question whether they had made a terrible mistake. Was this truly a journey of discovery, or had they crossed a line they could never return from? Then, 2 days before their arrival, Fint returned to William's quarters with the same stranger who had visited him before. The man was grave, his eyes dark with urgency. He handed William a new manuscript, its pages older and more fragile than the last. As Fint translated the text, a chill ran through William's body. The manuscript contained a decree from the Custodians, an order to halt their journey. It spoke of the dangers of crossing the ice, of the ancient powers that guarded the passage. "This is not just a warning," Fint said, his voice trembling. "It is an ultimatum. If you proceed, you risk everything, your life, your soul, and the world as you know it. William stood frozen, his mind racing. He realized then that the journey ahead was no longer just an exploration. It was a battle, one that would determine not only their fate, but the fate of all humanity. The Vanishing Act. William woke early that morning with a sense of urgency gnawing at him. Fint's cryptic words echoed in his mind, and the tension among the crew had reached a fever pitch. They were only 2 days away from their destination, yet now, everything seemed uncertain. The mysterious manuscript had painted a dark picture, one where the custodians, an ancient and shadowy force, controlled the very lands they sought to explore. But it wasn't just the manuscript that had unsettled him, it was Butler's sudden disappearance. For the past several days, the captain had been distant, absent at odd moments, leaving William to question whether he had been hiding something. He'd attempted to speak to Butler, but each time he was met with a vague excuse or silence. His trusted guide, the very man who had drawn them into this expedition, had vanished without a trace. The morning of November 14th arrived, and with it, the crushing realization that they were not ready. Without Butler, the crew was leaderless. Some wanted to turn back, others wanted to press on. Tensions reached a breaking point, with accusations flying about missing supplies and hidden motives. William found himself at a crossroads, torn between the burning desire to continue the mission and the growing fear that they had ventured too far. But as the crew gathered in the ship's galley to discuss their options, a knock at the door interrupted their meeting. It was Butler, appearing as though nothing had happened. He returned with a calm, assured expression and a bundle of supplies, as if the past few days had been nothing more than a brief inconvenience. The crew, relieved but confused, watched as Butler simply smiled and said, "It's time to leave, comrades." William could hardly believe his eyes. He had been prepared to abandon the journey, but now, Butler's sudden reappearance injected new hope into the crew. Questions flooded William's mind, but when he asked Butler what had happened during his disappearance, Butler's answer was curt and evasive. "I had to disappear," he said, "but I've secured what we need." He unrolled a large map, revealing vast, uncharted lands beyond the Antarctic ice, lands William had never imagined existed. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. They were about to cross into a world that no human had ever set foot in. But that same world, hidden behind the icy walls, was also the domain of the custodians, an ancient, unseen power that controlled the very fate of humanity. William's heart raced as he saw the coordinates Butler had marked on the map. These were the very same coordinates Butler had spoken of years earlier, the ones that had haunted William's dreams. As the crew scrambled to prepare the ship for departure, the weight of the situation settled heavily on William's shoulders. They had no idea what lay ahead, but they knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back. The walls of ice that loomed ahead were not just a physical barrier, but a metaphor for the unknown, a frontier that could change the course of history or doom them all. William found himself questioning every decision he had made, wondering whether the answers they sought were worth the risks. He had thought of Lucy, his wife, and the life they had planned together. Now, that life seemed a distant memory, and the reality of what lay ahead seemed both thrilling and terrifying. He wasn't just facing the unknown, he was about to challenge forces far beyond his understanding. The ship, now properly stocked and ready for the journey, sailed southward, its crew filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. The weather was cold, biting, and the winds howled as the ship cut through the waves. The southern seas grew rougher, and the crew's nerves began to fray as they neared the frozen wasteland. Yet, amid the growing tension, Butler remained calm, almost detached. He had been here before, or so he claimed. As they approached the Antarctic ice shelf, a sense of foreboding hung in the air, thicker than the fog that surrounded them. It was as if the very world around them was warning them to turn back. But William, driven by a thirst for discovery and a desire to uncover the secrets of the ice, pressed on. The sight of the towering ice walls stretching into the heavens sent a shiver down his spine. This was no ordinary voyage. It was a descent into a world lost to time, a world that would either reveal the truth of human origins or shatter everything they thought they knew about their past. And then, as they neared the ice wall, something unexpected happened. The temperature dropped even further, and the ship's instruments began to malfunction. Strange phenomena began to unfold. The water grew darker, the air thicker, and the crew began to report bizarre occurrences. Whispers in the wind, fleeting shadows at the edge of their vision. Butler remained unshaken, even as the crew grew restless. William, too, began to feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. but he held on to his resolve. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. As the ship neared the towering ice shelf, an eerie calm descended over the crew. It was as though they had crossed into a different world, one that was governed by rules they could not understand. And then, without warning, the ice split open, revealing a narrow passage, a passage that would lead them beyond the ice walls and into the heart of the unknown. The passage beyond. The ship creaked and groaned as it maneuvered through the narrow passage, the jagged walls of ice scraping against its hull. A sense of unease rippled through the crew, their once eager faces now lined with anxiety. The cold was suffocating, and the walls of ice that flanked them seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. William, standing at the helm, could hardly breathe. The passage seemed endless, the walls pressing in on them as if the very earth itself were trying to seal them inside. The crew whispered among themselves, but William could hear the growing doubt in their voices. Was this the right path? Were they about to uncover truths that no man was meant to know? Butler stood at the edge of the ship, his gaze fixed on the icy walls ahead. His expression was unreadable, yet there was a hint of something darker in his eyes, something William couldn't quite place. "We're getting close," Butler said, his voice low but steady. "Stay calm. This is where the true journey begins." William wasn't sure if the words were meant to reassure the crew or himself. The ship continued to plow through the icy passage, its progress slow but relentless. Each moment felt heavier than the last, as if the very air around them was thick with secrets waiting to be uncovered. As they rounded the final bend, the ice walls opened up into a vast, frozen landscape. Before them lay an endless stretch of white, a world that was as alien as it was beautiful. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows over the snow. It was a landscape untouched by time, a land that had never been seen by human eyes. William's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the edge of the known world. He felt a wave of both awe and terror wash over him. What had they stumbled upon? What ancient forces lay hidden beneath the ice, waiting to be discovered? The ship anchored in a small inlet, and the crew disembarked, stepping onto the snow-covered ground. It was a surreal moment, standing on the edge of a forgotten world, with the wind howling around them. The air was thin and biting, and the silence was deafening. But there was something else, a palpable sense of being watched. William glanced around, his instincts on high alert. He wasn't sure why, but it felt as though something was observing them from the shadows, waiting for them to make their move. "Stay close," Butler warned, his voice tight with urgency. "We don't know what's out here." The crew followed Butler as he led them through the frozen wilderness. They marched for hours, the landscape stretching on endlessly in every direction. William could feel the weight of the journey pressing down on him. His mind raced with questions. How had Butler known about this place? What were they really searching for? Was there something buried here, something that would change the course of history? Or were they walking into a trap, one set long before they had even arrived? The further they ventured into the unknown, the more isolated they became, as if the world itself had swallowed them whole. Then, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, they found it. In the distance, towering above the frozen landscape, stood an ancient structure, one that looked as though it had been there for millennia. It was a massive stone structure, its surface etched with strange symbols and markings that William couldn't decipher. The air around it seemed to hum with energy, as if the very earth was alive with ancient power. "This is it," Butler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is what we've been searching for." The Forbidden Temple. As the crew approached the temple, William could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. The structure before them was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its jagged stone walls rose impossibly high, and its surface was covered in intricate carvings, symbols and patterns that seemed to shift and change as the light hit them. The temple looked ancient, its age evident in the worn stone and crumbled edges, but there was something else about it, something unsettling. The air around it felt charged, as if it were alive, pulsing with a force that William couldn't comprehend. Butler led the way, his steps sure and purposeful, as though he had been here before. William, though hesitant, followed closely behind. The crew, too, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their eyes wide with awe and fear. The silence was broken only by the sound of their footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. the weight of the unknown pressing heavily on their shoulders. As they reached the entrance of the temple, a strange energy seemed to radiate from it, a force that sent a chill down William's spine. The doorway was tall and narrow, its surface marked with more of the cryptic symbols. Butler paused before it, his hand resting on the stone. "This is where it all began," he said, his voice filled with a strange reverence. "This is the key to everything." William couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement mixed with fear. What was inside? What secrets did this ancient place hold? With a deep breath, Butler pushed open the massive stone door, and the crew stepped inside. The interior of the temple was dimly lit, the walls lined with more carvings, ancient scripts and strange symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly glow. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of ancient stone filled William's nose. The silence inside was suffocating, the weight of the place pressing in on all sides. "Keep your eyes open," Butler warned, his voice low and serious. "We're not alone here." The crew moved cautiously through the temple, their footsteps echoing in the vast, hollow space. They passed through narrow corridors, each one more oppressive than the last, until they reached the heart of the temple, a massive chamber filled with strange artifacts and objects that seemed to defy logic. In the center of the room stood an altar, its surface covered in intricate carvings and strange symbols. Around it was several stone statues, each one depicting a figure that looked almost human, but with subtle differences, elongated limbs, strange features, and eyes that seemed to follow them as they moved. William's heart raced as he gazed at the altar. He could feel the energy in the room intensifying, the air thick with a sense of impending revelation. This was it, the heart of the mystery. This was what they had come for. The secrets unveiled. The room seemed to hold its breath as William approached the altar, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The stone figures surrounding them were unsettling, detailed and lifelike, but with eyes that seemed almost too knowing, too aware of their presence. William couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched from every angle, their every move being observed by unseen eyes. A strange force seemed to pull him closer to the altar, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. Butler stood off to the side, his gaze fixed on the altar. His expression was unreadable, but William could sense the deep connection the man had to this place. "This is where the truth lies," Butler said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "Everything we've been told, everything we've known, has been a lie." His voice carried a weight that hung in the air, thick with the unspoken truths that William had only begun to comprehend. The journey they had undertaken, the mysteries they had uncovered, were all leading to this moment. But what was the truth? And was it something that humanity was truly ready to face? The altar was covered in strange ancient artifacts, stones, crystals, and objects that glowed faintly with an otherworldly light. As William stepped closer, he could feel a pull in his chest, as if the very air around him was alive with energy. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the altar's surface, feeling a surge of power that coursed through him, searing his skin. The symbols on the altar began to glow brighter, their meaning suddenly clear. "The source," William whispered under his breath. The words seemed to resonate within the chamber, and the symbols shifted before his eyes, forming into an intricate pattern of interconnected circles and lines. "Do you understand now?" Butler asked, his voice almost a whisper. "The source is the key. It's the energy that connects everything. The past, the present, the future. It's the force that shapes our reality. And it's been hidden from us for centuries." William stood frozen, his mind racing to process what he was seeing and hearing. This was it, the truth that had been kept hidden from humanity for millennia. The source was real, and it was far more powerful than anything he had imagined. But what did it mean for humanity? And why had the custodians gone to such lengths to keep it a secret? As if in response to his thoughts, the chamber suddenly began to shift. The walls, once static, seemed to come alive, the stone pulsating with a strange energy. The symbols on the altar began to move, twisting and turning, as if they were being drawn into a greater pattern. A low hum filled the air, and the temperature in the room began to rise. "It's waking up," Butler said, his voice tense with urgency. "We need to leave, now." But it was too late. A blinding light erupted from the altar, filling the room and sending a wave of energy through the air. William was thrown backward, his body crashing to the ground as the world around him seemed to warp and distort. The awakening. William's vision blurred as he struggled to regain his bearings, the overwhelming force of the explosion leaving him disoriented. The world spun around him, and the ground felt as though it were shifting beneath him. He blinked rapidly, trying to focus, but the light from the altar was too intense, too blinding. He could hear the crew shouting, their voices distant and muffled, but their words didn't reach him. His heart raced in his chest, pounding as if it were trying to escape his body. He fought to move, to stand, but his limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. Then, the light began to dim, and the world slowly returned to focus. The energy in the room seemed to settle, leaving a strange, still silence in its wake. William slowly pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the shockwave. The crew was scattered around the room, their faces pale and wide-eyed with shock. Butler was the first to approach him, his face grim but determined. "We've awakened something," he said, his voice low and serious. "The source is no longer dormant. It's aware of us." William stared at him, his mind struggling to grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. The source, whatever it was, had been awakened, and it was not something to be trifled with. "But what does it mean?" William asked, his voice hoarse. "What now?" Butler took a deep breath, his gaze distant as if he were weighing the gravity of the situation. "The source has always been here, hidden in plain sight," he said. "But the custodians have kept it suppressed, afraid of its power. Now that it's been awakened, there's no going back." He paused, as if the weight of the words were too much to bear. "The source is the key to everything. Our past, our future, and it's more dangerous than you can imagine." As the crew regrouped, William's mind raced. What did it all mean? Why had they been brought to this place? What was the custodians' true purpose in keeping the source hidden? He felt a growing sense of unease, but there was also a strange sense of purpose beginning to take root within him. They had uncovered the greatest secret of all. Now, they had to decide what to do with it. The world they once knew was gone. They were standing on the precipice of something far greater and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The rumble of the temple's walls pulled William from his thoughts. The air around them was thick with energy, and the room seemed to tremble with the force of something unseen. Butler motioned for the crew to follow him. "We need to leave, now," he said urgently. "The source is not something we can control. It's too powerful." But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath them began to crack, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The temple was shifting, and the crew was no longer in control of their destiny. Something was coming, and it was far worse than anything they had ever imagined. The custodians return. As the crew scrambled to exit the temple, the ground shook violently beneath them. William's heart raced in his chest as he followed Butler, the eerie hum of the source still echoing in his ears. The walls seemed to warp and distort, as if the very fabric of reality was bending around them. The temple was alive with power, and William could feel it pulling at him, as though trying to drag him into its depths. "Move!" Butler shouted, grabbing William by the arm and pulling him toward the exit. The crew followed closely behind, their faces etched with fear and confusion. William couldn't help but glance back at the altar as they rushed through the corridors. The source was still pulsing, its energy growing stronger with each passing second. What had they done? What had they unleashed? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain. The custodians were coming, and they would stop at nothing to regain control. As they burst through the doors of the temple, they were greeted by a sight that froze them in their tracks. In the distance, across the icy landscape, a massive fleet of ships appeared on the horizon. The custodians had returned. They had known about the source all along, and now they were here to reclaim it. The crew stood frozen, fear gripping their hearts. There was no escaping this. The battle for humanity's future had begun, and they were caught in the middle of it. "We have to move, now!" Butler shouted, urgency in his voice, but William's mind was spinning. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The custodians had been watching them, waiting for this moment. They had known about the source, and now they were here to take it back. The crew scrambled to prepare for the fight of their lives. The war for the truth had begun, and there would be no turning back. The war for the source. William and his crew braced themselves for the inevitable conflict as the custodian fleet loomed on the horizon. Tension filled the air, thick and electric. Butler, the crew's leader, was resolute as he directed them to prepare for battle. making it clear that the source was the key to humanity's survival. There was no escape now. They had to stand their ground. As the custodian ships closed in, William knew the journey that began with a search for truth was now a desperate fight for humanity's future. They had no choice but to protect the source at all costs. The battle commenced with a deafening roar as the custodian ships descended upon the temple. Explosions shook the ice, and chaos erupted around them, but the crew held firm. They fought with everything they had, knowing that the source was more than just an artifact. It was the key to unlocking humanity's true potential. William, alongside his crew, was fueled by a deep sense of purpose. As the battle raged on, they faced wave after wave of custodian forces, but their determination was unwavering. The crew would die before they allowed the custodians to take the source. The conflict escalated, and William found himself face to face with the custodian leader. The towering figure sneered, claiming the source was never meant for them. But William, driven by the truth he had uncovered, refused to back down. With a roar, he charged, engaging in a brutal battle with the leader. The clash was fierce, but William, empowered by a sense of destiny, landed the final blow, bringing the custodian leader to his knees. The fight was far from over, but for now, they had secured the source. Humanity's future was safe, for now. With the custodians defeated, William stood before the source, its quiet pulse a reminder of the battle they had just fought. The temple was in ruins, but the source was in their hands. It was clear that the war for humanity's freedom was not over. The custodians would return, but for the first time in history, humanity had the upper hand. The crew, weary but resolute, knew their mission had only just begun. They now had the truth, and with it, they could change the course of history. As William and the crew gathered, a sense of unity filled the air. They were the last hope for humanity, armed with the truth and the source. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready. William spoke with conviction, knowing that their journey was just beginning. They would use the source to awaken those still trapped in the custodians' lies. With their newfound knowledge, they could break the chains that had bound humanity for so long. Together, they would fight to the end, for the truth, for freedom, and for humanity's future. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.